They told us the world was stable. They told us diplomacy would hold. But then the sirens wailed, the skies lit up, and headlines screamed what no one was ready to hear. Iran just struck a U.S. base. This isn't just another story of conflict. This is the moment everything changed. Borders are trembling, alliances are shifting, and the line between peace and war has never been thinner. What you're about to hear isn't speculation. It's the raw truth behind the strike that shook the world and brought the fear of World War III crashing back into our lives. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what's at stake and why this moment may define our generation. Don't look away. The world already did that for far too long. The strike that Iran launched on a U.S. military base didn't just mark a military move. It was a declaration that the world had crossed into uncharted territory. It wasn't just another missile in the sky. It was a message written in fire across the surface of international relations. For decades, the game had rules, silent boundaries no one dared to cross. Diplomatic tensions, proxy battles, sanctions, and threats, yes. But direct strikes on major power, that was rare, calculated, unthinkable. Yet here we are, standing in the aftermath of a decision that could redefine what war and deterrence looked like in this century. The strike wasn't a whisper in the dark. It was thunder in broad daylight. Iran didn't hide it, didn't deny it, didn't apologize for it. That boldness alone sent ripples through military corridors and foreign ministries around the globe. It wasn't just about the U.S. base. It was about the fact that a regional power had the audacity and capability to hit a global superpower directly in a manner that made even the most composed strategists pause. And when that kind of audacity appears on the world stage, it forces every nation to reevaluate its place in the order of power. This single act shattered the illusion of stability. In boardrooms and briefing rooms, people realized that the balance had shifted. The air of untouchability surrounding U.S. bases overseas was gone. The belief that war would always remain a contained, manageable concept no longer held weight. This wasn't just a symbolic blow. It was a physical one that could escalate into a series of global responses if not handled with surgical precision. The red lines, once bold and clear, were suddenly blurred by smoke and flame. The world has grown used to the theater of war, the threats, the posturing, the media spin. But this was different. This was real. This was steel against steel. What makes this moment so critical is that it didn't come from a rogue actor or a stateless militia. It came from a nation state with full awareness of the consequences, full understanding of the risks, and full control of the message. Iran wasn't just sending a missile, it was rewriting its role on the globe. It was saying that it would no longer be bullied, no longer be sanctioned into silence, no longer be the punching bag of Western foreign policy. It was saying, we're here and we're ready. And so the world now stands at a precipice. What was once considered unthinkable is now unfolding. Alliances will be tested, leaders will be pushed, and history once again begins to write itself in a language shaped by fire, fear, and the fragile hope that someone, somewhere, will choose to break the cycle before it consumes us all. Iran's strike on the U.S. military base wasn't a flash of sudden anger. It was the result of years of slow-burning hostility, broken diplomacy, and rising pressure that had been building like a storm beneath the surface. To understand this moment, you have to go back to the unraveling of the Iran nuclear deal, back to the imposition of crippling sanctions, and back to the night when General Qasem Soleimani, one of Iran's most powerful military figures, was killed in a U.S. drone strike. That moment was more than just a tactical operation. It was an insult etched deep into the memory of Iran's leadership and people. It shifted the tone of confrontation from political to personal. It turned strategy into vengeance. Iran didn't respond immediately, at least not in the way the world expected. Instead, it waited, watched, and absorbed. Through cyber warnings, missile test demonstrations, and regional influence, Tehran let the pressure simmer while recalculating its next move. But when it did act, it did so with deliberate timing and direct clarity. This wasn't about making noise. It was about sending a message. The years of threats, assassinations, economic strangulation, and regional isolation had reached their boiling point. Iran chose not to act through proxies or hidden channels. It chose to face its opponent directly. And that choice speaks volumes about what this strike truly meant. The strike was a statement of survival, a declaration that Iran would not sit quietly in the face of what it saw as one-sided aggression and global humiliation. The sanctions had choked its economy, the media had demonized its image, and its sovereignty had been consistently undermined. From their perspective, the world was not listening, so they decided to make the world listen. When the missile left Iranian soil, it carried decades of grievance, decades of being talked down to, policed, and provoked without equal opportunity to defend its own narrative. The killing of Soleimani was a turning point not just for Iran, but for the region. It lit a fire under every buried frustration, every ignored plea for respect, every violation of space and voice. The retaliation now wasn't just for one man. It was for the years of feeling boxed in by global powers who believed Iran would never dare push back. And in choosing to push back not through words but through military action, Iran rewrote the rules of engagement. It said enough. Enough silence, enough submission, enough waiting for justice that never comes. This wasn't a moment of madness. It was a moment of clarity, drawn from years of escalation without empathy. It was a breaking point dressed as strategy. Iran didn't lash out blindly. It hit the exact place that would echo loudest. And in doing so, it reminded the world that no nation, no matter how powerful, can act without consequences forever. The retaliation was not random. It was written long ago, in every broken agreement, every provocation, and every life lost while diplomacy turned its back. The moment the news broke, Iran strikes U.S. base. A wave of fear surged across continents like a shock wave through a brittle structure. It wasn't just another headline. It was a trigger. Markets plunged, emergency meetings were called, embassies scrambled, and across social media, the same phrase kept repeating like an alarm bell. World War III. For the first time in years, the possibility of a global war wasn't a distant historical memory or a theoretical debate. It was knocking at the world's doorstep, loud and real. The fear wasn't imagined, and it wasn't dramatized. It was rooted in the sheer scale of the confrontation, in the history behind it, and in the uncertainty of what would follow. Unlike proxy battles or cyber skirmishes, this was state-on-state aggression. One sovereign nation had launched a direct military strike on another's forces. In a world already fractured by economic instability, political polarization, and regional conflicts, this kind of escalation carried the risk of unraveling the thin threads holding everything together. The U.S. and Iran are not two isolated entities. They are tied to complex webs of alliances, regional commitments, and strategic rivalries. A spark between them doesn't stay in one place. It pulls in powers from the Gulf, from Europe, from Russia and China, and potentially even from NATO, creating a chain reaction too fast to control once it starts. This fear wasn't just about military retaliation. It was about the unknown. Would the U.S. respond with overwhelming force? Would Iran unleash further regional strikes? Would Israel get involved? What about Saudi Arabia? What would Russia do if American assets began moving in their sphere of influence? Every scenario felt plausible, and every path seemed to lead toward conflict on a scale that hadn't been witnessed in generations. The phrase World War III wasn't hyperbole. It was a reflection of how fragile peace had become, and how quickly that illusion could be shattered with a single act. What deepened the fear was the speed of how it all unfolded. Within minutes of the strike, videos flooded the internet. Missiles lighting up the night sky, sirens blaring, soldiers taking cover, analysts appearing on screen with maps and timelines of previous wars. It felt like history had ripped itself from the pages of old textbooks and come roaring back with modern weapons and real-time updates. And in that storm of information, truth became slippery. No one knew what was next. Fear thrives in uncertainty. And in those first few hours, the world had more questions than answers. But the fear didn't just stem from the possibility of destruction. It came from the recognition that the systems built to prevent such conflict were no longer trusted. Diplomacy had been reduced to tweets, peace deals replaced by photo ops, and intelligence drowned in partisan noise. So when Iran struck and the world held its breath, it wasn't just afraid of war, it was afraid that no one was capable of stopping it. And in that silence, as the dust settled and the future stood unwritten, the world realized just how close we were to the edge. The strike on the U.S. base by Iran shattered more than concrete and steel. It shattered the myth of American military invincibility. For decades, the United States has positioned its bases around the globe as untouchable fortresses, outposts of power, built on intelligence, precision, and the promise of overwhelming retaliation. But in one explosive moment, that image cracked. Iran's strike wasn't just about delivering damage. It was about sending a clear message that no place is off limits when the stakes are survival and sovereignty. The symbolic weight of that moment far outweighed the physical destruction. A regional power had just demonstrated it could hit back directly and publicly, and the world saw it live. For years, U.S. bases have operated with the quiet confidence that comes from global dominance. Troops are stationed under the protection of layered defenses, surrounded by radar, satellites, and the most advanced technology the world has ever known. But even with all of that, Iran's missiles landed, and that raised the kind of questions nobody wanted to answer. Questions about how ready the U.S. truly is, about the reliability of its intelligence network, and about the political leadership behind these decisions. How did a heavily fortified installation become vulnerable? Was it arrogance, miscalculation, or had America underestimated Iran's capabilities for far too long? The psychological impact of this event reached deeper than military circles. It sent tremors through the national psyche. The idea that even the most powerful military machine in history could be hit, that the illusion of safety could be pierced so publicly, was unnerving. For the first time in a long time, American families with loved ones serving overseas began to understand what it feels like when war isn't just a mission briefing. It's a real, immediate threat. It made the cost of foreign policy personal again. No longer just numbers on a screen or headlines on a distant front. It became about human lives caught in the crossfire of pride, power, and politics. And this vulnerability didn't just expose a base, it exposed the strategy. It forced the Pentagon and the White House to face uncomfortable truths about deterrence, risk, and global reputation. If the United States could be hit, then others might feel empowered to try the same. It cracked open the door to a world where superpowers are no longer feared in the same way, where others now believe they too can strike and survive. Iran's action wasn't just a military gamble. It was a calculated move to redefine the boundaries of confrontation, to show that might doesn't guarantee immunity, that boldness, even when it comes from a smaller nation, can still force the giants to step back and reconsider. This strike didn't just change the battlefield, it changed the narrative. And in today's world, sometimes the story is more powerful than the weapon. When Iran struck a U.S. base, it wasn't just the West that turned its eyes to the skies. It was the entire Muslim world that stopped and watched, and not with fear, but with rising emotion. For decades, Muslims across the globe have seen their lands turned into battlegrounds, their leaders toppled, their people branded and bombed, from Iraq to Afghanistan, from Libya to Syria. One nation after another has tasted the bitterness of foreign intervention, often under the banner of freedom, democracy, or security. But what many Muslims saw in those years wasn't liberation, it was destruction, humiliation, and the erosion of sovereignty. So when Iran, a Muslim-majority nation long seen as defiant and cornered, dared to strike back, not with proxies or protests, but directly and openly, it triggered something deep inside the collective Muslim consciousness. This wasn't just a military maneuver. For many watching in the Muslim world, this was a symbolic strike, a moment of standing up to decades of one-sided power, of saying enough on a global stage that rarely listens to Muslim voices unless they are in pain or silence. It wasn't about supporting Iran's politics or ideology. It was about seeing someone push back against a system that had long operated with impunity. People from Morocco to Malaysia, from Turkey to Tunisia, discussed it not just as an act of war, but as an act of dignity. In streets, in mosques, in online spaces, the conversation wasn't about missiles, it was about meaning. For too long, Muslims have watched their homes become footnotes in geopolitical games. Drone strikes, sanctions, invasions, all have left scars that the media often overlooks. But this time, a strike didn't come from the West. It came from within the Muslim world. And whether one agrees or disagrees with Iran's policies, many could not deny the shift in power dynamics. It was a moment where Muslims felt like they weren't just being acted upon, they were acting. And that psychologically changed the tone of global discourse. The youth especially took notice. A generation raised on images of their people suffering, fighting for breath, struggling for recognition, now saw a headline that didn't spell victimhood, but resistance. It may have been a military operation, but to millions it was a message: the world's tables are turning, and the Muslim world is no longer merely a backdrop to someone else's war. It can write its own script, speak in its own voice, and if pushed to the edge, it can hit back. This doesn't mean Muslims want war. In fact, most yearn for peace, for dignity, for freedom from the chaos that's plagued their lands for decades. But they also want fairness. They want their lives to matter as much as any others. And for once, even if through the fog of conflict they felt seen, not as victims, but as participants in shaping what comes next. That feeling, however brief, left a mark. One strike didn't just impact politics. It stirred a quiet, growing sense of pride that the world may not have expected, but can no longer ignore. The moment Iran struck the U.S. base, the world didn't just witness a military escalation. It arrived at a crossroad where two paths stood wide open, the road of uncontrollable escalation or the path of hard-earned awakening. In every major turning point of history, there comes a moment where humanity is forced to decide whether it will repeat its worst mistakes or learn from the pain it has caused. This was one of those moments. Because what happened wasn't just about Iran and the United States, it was about a world system stretched thin, showing its cracks under the weight of unchecked power, pride, and provocation. The fear that followed wasn't irrational. It was the sound of an old world order creaking under pressure, and people around the globe sensed it. The question now was not just what happens next, but who are we becoming? War in the modern age doesn't only destroy bodies, it erases trust, it deepens divides, and it creates generations shaped by trauma rather than hope. Yet here, the world stood again on the edge of that same cycle. One strike could lead to retaliation, retaliation to escalation, and escalation to chaos on a scale we claim to be too civilized for. But maybe this is the very moment civilization is tested. Can we restrain ourselves when every instinct screams for dominance? Can we walk away from the edge when so much has already been invested in aggression? That's not weakness. That's evolution. Because real strength isn't in launching missiles. It's in holding fire when you have every reason not to. This moment is also a test of leadership. Do our leaders serve justice or ego? Are they guardians of peace or gamblers of power? The people of this world, whether they live in Washington or Tehran, New York or Baghdad, deserve more than speeches and threats. They deserve vision. They deserve men and women in charge who see beyond the next election, beyond the next strike, and care about the world we leave behind for those not yet born. Because if this moment spirals out of control, if the voices of caution are drowned by the drums of war, then history will not forgive those who lit the match when they could have put out the flame. But there is still time. There is still a chance for awakening, for reflection that turns into action, for confrontation that births conversation. This is a moment when the world can say, we've seen what comes of war, and we choose something higher. It won't be easy. The path of peace never is. It requires humility, courage, and the willingness to rise